Okay, welcome back. I want to start this segment by just giving you my experience as I was preparing to do this training. I have most of what I thought was necessary in my head, but I just wanted to freshen up and call some people who knew. So here's my experience, and there's a reason why I'm telling you this, and I'll get to that. But originally, I called the Division of Water Rights because I personally used to work at the Division of Drinking Water at the state, and so I know that it was Division of Water Rights, and I called there. They sent me back to somebody who wasn't there, so I went back to the secretary, and she says, well, there's nobody else. And so she suggested that I call Rural Water Association of Utah. So I thought, well, I haven't heard of that one, but I called them, and they couldn't help me. They didn't have anybody, and they suggested that I call the Division of Drinking Water. And I knew it wasn't drinking water that could help me, at least as of 15 years ago it wasn't, but I figured I'd give her the benefit of the doubt. I called the Division of Drinking Water. And they said, no, that's not us, after I was finally able to get a hold of somebody. And they said, try the county health departments. So I started by calling Utah County Health Department, and of course I couldn't get a hold of anybody. And then I called Salt Lake County Health Department, who referred me to a housing sort of a group, who referred me to a water quality person eventually. And this was the first of the people who actually answered their phone and knew something about the subject. But I had to get a pry bar to get her information out of her. For example, I asked, what are the samples that people in your county need to take? And she says, well, I'm not going to go over those with you over the phone. And I thought, okay, I'm going to pronounce myself guilty of this, but I know what their motivations are. They want to get back to whatever they were doing. Maybe that's their solitaire game on the computer or whatever. But if they take a call and it's not their specific department, they just want to get rid of you. And that's what was happening to me. So I was able to pry a little bit of information out of her. And then she suggested again that I call the Division of Water Rights. And so now the loop gets completed. I called the Division of Water Rights, didn't get me anywhere. So then I called, I thought, well, I've called Salt Lake and Utah County Health Departments. I'm going to call some other health departments and see what they have to say. And so then I called Bear River Health Department and got a hold of somebody who was actually in his office, and he answered his phone, and he was actually very helpful. And then I called another little health department in southern Utah, and he also was helpful. So the reason I'm telling you this story is if you want information, call the smallest governmental group that you can, because if you call the state, for example, you're going to get the same runaround that I got, and it is frustrating. It makes you angry. It makes you want to reach through the phone and strangle somebody. Now, what I was able to determine is what I have next, and that's that generally there are some categories of chemicals that you may or may not be required to do. Now, for example, one of the health departments I talked to basically just required two of these, coliform and E. coli. And we're going to talk about those in a minute. And those are fairly cheap tests, and their goals, you could tell, are just to keep costs down for the people that they regulate. Others have, for example, Utah County has a few more regulations as to what they're going to require that be tested, but it's not as bad. By contrast, you go to Salt Lake County, and they've got this list that is so long that this woman is not going to talk about them with me over the phone. So let that tell you whatever it does. So the general categories are that you have inorganic chemicals, you have organic chemicals, you've got metals, what I've decided to lump together, which is metals and dissolved solids, and then you've got bacteria. And we're going to go over each of these. So starting with the organic chemicals, that's mostly pesticides, but you can also have maybe oils and greases, maybe Farmer Joe. Before your client wanted to buy the place, maybe he was going out in the back and just draining the oil from his old Ford truck right next to the well, not thinking that he is going to be drinking that oil 2 months later. And so that would show up in the organics. And again, maybe you've got Farmer Joe who's doing something a little bit more typical, and maybe he's trying to keep the weeds down and he's using pesticides or herbicides, or maybe, who knows, whatever chemicals he may be using out there in his field. Obviously, it's no surprise for a farmer to use chemicals to try and manage his farm. That's kind of what everybody does. So it's important to test for pesticides, especially if you've got farmland within a distance of the wellhead. And we're going to talk about what those required distances are, or recommended as the case may be, by the county health department. We're going to go over those distances in the next segment. Then you've got the inorganics. And inorganics are going to be nitrates and nitrites, and I'm going to put radon in this list as well. Nitrites and nitrates are basically, if you've got feces that are on the surface that are near the well, and that water goes through the feces and it goes down, the bacteria may or may not be detectable when it gets down to the wellhead and then gets pumped into the house, but nitrates and nitrites will. So if you're high in those categories, you know that the water has been filtered by feces, if you will. Obviously, if you've got, mice that are maybe defecating in the water, or whatever that sort of scenario may be, you can have those sorts of things that will show up when you sample for nitrites and nitrates. That's the inorganics. Then you've got a category where I've lumped metals and dissolved solids together, and that would be manganese, and that's generally not bad for you, but it causes a dark smear on pretty much everything. I've seen dishwashers look like they have been through a war because you've got manganese in that private well water. You've got arsenic, which of course is a poison. Private wells can have more arsenic than they should. And you can have just total dissolved solids, TDS, and that is a measure of just how much stuff is in the water that is not water. And that can be telling. It can involve salts or whatever. There's a lot of things that TDS can be, but it's another big picture measure of what might be going on inside that water. Then you've got hardness, which is calcium and magnesium. And, we've all heard of water softeners and water softening. And, calcium is actually good for you. Calcium directly is not a problem for us as humans, but if you've got a lot of hardness inside the house, then that hardness is going to age your water heater. It's going to age a lot of your, for your example, your sinks and your washer, those sorts of things. And it's, of course, going to make cleaning more difficult. Just be aware also that a water softener system doesn't just remove calcium. It's going to take out calcium and magnesium, and in its place it's going to have sodium, which calcium and even magnesium to a point are good for you. Sodium is not. So you don't want to be drinking this stuff. It doesn't taste good and it's not good for you. So that's the metals and dissolved solids category. Then you've got the bacteria, and that can be coliform and E. coli. And these are the tests that are pretty much top of the list for whatever local health department you may be working on. They basically just want to know, first and foremost, that the water you're drinking hasn't been filtered through poop. The coliform is generally kind of a big umbrella. It can be any one of a number of things, but E. coli is under that umbrella, and it's another very good indication. You don't want E. coli in the water. Then one other thing that I have seen from my own personal experiences, and under the bacteria category, you can get what's called an iron bacteria. And this is not necessarily bad for you, but it does make the water taste like sulfur. Even where I live now in Saratoga Springs, there are times during the summer when the water tastes like sulfur, and it's because they have to bring in these warmer waters that have more sulfur. And it does make a lot of homeowners wonder why they're smelling something that smells like sewage. Iron bacteria. I remember as a little boy, I went out to visit Grandma, and she lives out in eastern Utah in the Roosevelt area. And I'd go out there, and there would be stomach problems because she had an iron bacteria. The water tasted like sulfur, and then of course I was having stomach issues. Now, if you sell a home to somebody who has this iron bacteria, they're going to have diarrhea for the first week or so when they move in. You may get a very angry phone call. Why did you sell me a home that makes me sick and gives me diarrhea? My whole family has diarrhea. You don't want that scenario. You have that again on your radar, and you might even want to just have them test or taste test the water as part of going through, especially on a private well system. Let them know that their bodies will get used to that sulfur smell, and after a week or so the diarrhea will stop. But it's an unpleasant first week. And the next segment, we're going to talk about locating private wells and knowing if they're properly positioned to protect your clients and your family. Be right back.